واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. وقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: إن الحسين مصباح الهدى وسفينة النجاة. صلوات پر محمد اللهم صل على محمد. Dear respected Mu'mineen wa Mu'minat, Salamun Alaikum wa Rahmatullahi wa Barakatuh. Before we proceed further with tonight's program, I have a request to recite Surah Fatiha wal Ikhlas for the marhumeen of brother Baqir Hasnain. Some of the names of the marhumeen have been listed here. Marhum Syed Aftab Hussain ibn Syed Muhammad Hasnain Abidi, Marhum Syed Muhammad Hasnain ibn Syed Zille Hasnain, Marhum Syed Ali Ishrat Jafari ibn Syed Fasihul Hasan Jafari, and Marhuma Sayyida Niyaz Fatima binte Ale Nabi Rizwi. Please recite another salawat for Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad wa ajil farajuhum. Alhamdulillah, tonight we have the opportunity to move forward another stage, another manzil on our journey towards Karbala. This journey from darkness to light, from debasement to honor, from indignity to dignity, from constriction to freedom. And like every journey, this journey too has its adab. And we've been touching upon one or two of these adab every night. Tonight, the adab that I would like to mention is that in this journey, we see that particularly when it comes to these gatherings of mourning and commemoration, there is a special emphasis placed on poetry. Emphasizing poetry in our gatherings of mourning is one of the adab of commemorating the events of Karbala. So when we see in our gatherings that there is a marsiya, there is a noha, there is a latmiya, and many other such forms of poetry, this isn't something that has happened accidentally or because we like it. In fact, this is a pattern which has been established by the Masumin alayhimus salam when they used to hold their gatherings of mourning. And learning from that, the mu'mineen of that time, the ulama from that time onwards, have ensured that this adab passes on generation after generation, and it has reached us. So this is important. This part of our program is also important. And perhaps later on in tonight's majlis, we'll be able to touch upon a possible reason for why this may be the case. This is important. For example, I had mentioned a few nights ago the story of Di'bal al-Khuzai meeting with Imam Riza alayhi salatu wassalam. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Di'bal, this lover of the Ahl Bayt, this staunch and strong Shia poet, travels to Merv to meet Imam Raza after he has been forced to migrate to Merv. And when he meets him, Imam Raza, I narrated this, asks for a curtain to be put up and asks for the ladies of his household to come and sit behind the curtain, and then goes on to command Di'bal with these words: Irthil Hussain, Ya Di'bal, Irthil Hussain. Recite a marsiya for Hussain. And then goes on to say this, and this is what I would like to add tonight. In the same sentence is followed by the next sentence. Imam Riza goes on to say, Anta madihuna. You are somebody who praises us, does madh. Anta madihuna. And then goes on to say, Wa anta nasiruna ma dumta hayya. And you are our nasir, our helper, our assistant for as long as you are alive. What was the Ibal doing? Was he arranging for a large amount of funds for the Imam? No. Was he a commander in an armed expedition? No. Was he an important scholar? No. Even if he were any of these things or any other thing, he would be playing a positive role. He was a poet and he was addressed as Nasiruna, Anta Nasiruna, Ma Dumta Hayy. It's important, the aspect of poetry as an adab and part of our culture of mourning, inshallah. On this journey of our life, we've seen that we are guided by the system of imamat. This remarkable system of imamat. This system of imamat that is, as we saw in our previous discussions, is always running, never sleeps, never hibernates, never takes a break, always finds a way to move forward, never feels that things are at a dead end, nothing can be done anymore. The enemy has taken control of everything. No, it never. The system of imamat never succumbs to this kind of a thought process. And consequently, we saw last night that this system of guidance, the system of imamat is moving ahead, success from one success to the other. And it is essentially undefeatable. Sure, there are setbacks, and we touched upon a few of them last night. But setbacks are one thing and defeat is quite another. It's undefeatable. In fact, it's so remarkable that it is able to turn these setbacks into launching pads for future success. Is able to turn what the world calls failures into what it truly is, what these things truly are, which are opportunities. Let me just give you an example and move on. After the events of Karbala, Karbala was, of course, a terrible, terrible tragedy. Karbala was, of course, in a sense, a climax and one of the peaks of the oppression that the Ahlul Bayt and their followers have had to suffer. But dear brothers and sisters, the period immediately following Karbala was no less terrifying. No less terrifying. Just imagine. This is a government, this is a power, an illegitimate power at that time that is totally drunk on success. It has managed to massacre the grandson of the Holy Messenger, his family, his supporters in broad daylight and get away with it. There is no surprise then. It goes on to sack Medina. It goes on to ruin the Kaaba in Makkah, the same authority and power of that time. Just imagine the reign of terror that has gripped the Muslim lands at that time. Things are so bad that the Imam of this age, our fourth Imam, Imam Zainul Abidin alayhi salatu wassalam, please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali. The fourth Imam, the Imam of this time, incidentally, his Imamat is one of the longest periods of Imamat that we have among all the Masumeen. Of course, the longest period is the period of Imamat of our Imam. It is still ongoing. But among the other Imams, his is one of the longest Imamats. It lasted more than 3 decades. And it is in this period, and it is about this period that our Imam, the fourth Imam, It has been narrated from him that he said, Irtadda an-nas ba'da al-Husayn. Irtadda an-nas ba'da al-Husayn. The people, they became infidels. They rejected Islam after Hussein. And the Muslims. The Muslims became non-Muslims after Hussein. And of course, this doesn't mean that they started going, for example, to temples and worshipping idols. No, that's not what happened. Because they turned away from the authority established by Allah. They turned away from the teachings of Allah. They accepted and submitted to a ruler such as Yazid and those that followed Yazid, for example. But the extent of their disobedience and their debasement was such that we see the Imam saying, Irtadda nas ba'da al-Husayn. People have been misguided. People were misguided before. People have been misguided after. They have disobeyed many teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But it isn't frequently that for any period of time we find a Ma'soom saying that the people of this age have turned into non-Muslims. Such was the extent of their disobedience. Officially they were Muslim. Officially they were all Muslim. But the extent of their weakness and disobedience was so terrible that this term was used to describe them. And it is in this time when our fourth Imam, we are speaking of how the system of Imamat is able to turn threats and so-called failures into opportunities. And so we see that the fourth Imam, when he is in Medina, and every movement and step and meeting is watched by spies and reported upon. And it is no longer possible for him to engage in any kind of open guidance, openly describing what is correct and what is incorrect, who is haq and who is batil. At this time, what does our Imam do? He shifts his focus towards presenting us some of the most beautiful prayers that humanity has ever seen, which have been gathered together in As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyah. This book is one of the things that we Shia are proud of, and therefore it is very becoming of us that just as we must be familiar with the content of the Quran, we must be familiar with the content of Nahjul Balagha, we must make the effort to become familiar with the content of this book as well, this collection of exquisite, beautiful, touching prayers, As-Sahifa As-Sajjadiyah, translated into many languages, freely available on the internet now. So many Muslims belonging to other groups and sects have said that when they have encountered and come across and read these prayers, they said, this is just what we were looking for. This was the missing piece in our spiritual life. We found it here. So we see this position, this time of extreme pressure and threat turned into an opportunity by the system of Imamat. And we saw yesterday that the system of Imamat is able to be so remarkably successful because it works as a movement. It works as a movement. We saw that a social movement, a public movement, has at least three important elements. It has a lofty goal. We saw that Imamat has the loftiest possible goal, filling the entire earth with every form of justice and battling any kind of injustice. We've seen that any successful social movement has a charismatic leader. And we saw that the system of Imamat has the most perfect leader imaginable, a Ma'soom. What more could any movement ask for? And we see that every movement, every other movement addresses a portion of humanity. A portion, this country, that tribe, that community. But the system of Imamat addresses all of humanity. And it has been doing this for 1400 years. The most remarkably durable and resilient and therefore most successful movement that humanity has ever witnessed. We went over this yesterday. Dear brothers and sisters, but I think we should add another element to this. We should add another element to this. We've seen three elements. One is the aim, one is the leader, and the third is the breadth and scope of the audience that is addressed. And on all three counts, we find that the movement of Imamat is superior to any other movement. But there is another element which I think we've missed up. To throw light on this element tonight, I'll take the help of a couple of verses from the Holy Quran. We've spoken on previous nights about a very important figure from among the messengers and prophets, Hazrat Ibrahim ala nabiyana wa alihi wa alayhi salam. Please recite a salawat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Hazrat Ibrahim, a very important figure in the history of the system of Imamat. And Hazrat Ibrahim struggles to guide, makes these exceptionally successful efforts to guide in different stages. We've seen, the last time we spoke about him, it was that event about destroying the idols and then placing the axe on the shoulder of the biggest idol. But it appears from the various ayat about him and his efforts in the Quran that this pertains to the earlier stages of his imamat or of his mission. This pertains to the earlier stages. When we move up to the later stages, obviously he's moving from strength to strength in his mission, stage after stage. When we move up, we find, for example, in Surah Al-Mumtahina, this ayat, which says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Qad kanat lakum uswatun hasanatun fi Ibrahim. There is for you, O mu'mineen, O humanity, there is for you a good example and role model in Ibrahim. A similar ayat exists for our Holy Messenger himself, but where the Holy Messenger has been called a good example and role model. But the same thing has been said about Hazrat Ibrahim as well in the Quran. There is for you in Ibrahim a good role model. But not just in Ibrahim. قَدْ كَانَتْ لَكُمْ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ فِي إِبْرَاهِيمَ وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ. And there is a good role model for you in whom? Who else apart from Ibrahim? الَّذِينَ مَعَهُ. Those who were with him. Because we are speaking of a stage of strength. إِذْ قَالُوا لِقَوْمِهِمْ إِنَّا بُرَآءُ مِنْكُمْ وَمِمَّا تَعْبُدُونَ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. When are they a good role model? Ibrahim وَالَّذِينَ مَعَهُ. When are they a good role model? When they address their community, the community that they were living among. When they address their community openly declaring that we reject and we repudiate that which you believe in and that which you worship. Obviously, such a statement can only be made from a position of strength. From a position of strength, an open declaration of rejection of disbelief and deviation. So this is one ayat which will help us come to the fourth element. As I mentioned, we are trying to get to the fourth element in a successful movement. Let's move ahead to several centuries and look at another ayat here. This ayat is from Surah Al-Baqarah. It pertains to a very important battle in the history of Islam. A very important battle. Dear brothers and sisters, as you know, there was a battle called Ahzab, the Battle of Al-Ahzab, also referred to as the Battle of Khandaq. This was the final large confrontation between the enemies of Islam, based essentially in Makkah, centered in Makkah at that time, and the Muslims who were centered essentially in Medina. Why was it called the Battle of Al-Ahzab? Al-Ahzab in Arabic means groups, parties. Because this was a battle in which the disbelievers of Makkah had managed to rally each and every non-Muslim tribe and community that existed in a large area around them. Some say all of the Arabian Peninsula that hadn't yet become Muslim. They were part of this. They had joined in this. So it wasn't just the Meccans against the Muslims in Medina. It was all of the Arabian Peninsula against the Muslims in Medina. And they laid siege to Medina, which is why the Khandaq, this trench, was dug around Medina so as to prevent them from attacking Medina. Their numbers were so much greater that the Muslims understood that if we engage in open battle with them, we will be swamped. So therefore, they came up with this defensive strategy of digging a trench around Medina, and which forced this massive army, this collection of tens of tribes and groups who were otherwise enemies among themselves, many of them, but who had gathered together to snuff out Islam in Medina. It forced them to stop on the other side of the trench and lay siege. A siege that lasted for months. Months. They blocked the passage of food and other essentials into Medina. They laid siege to Medina. This is a pattern that we have seen repeatedly over history, including now in our present times. They made it very difficult. There was a shortage of food. There was a shortage of essentials in Medina. And it was very difficult to survive in Medina. And it is about this that in Surah Baqarah it is said, Am hasibtum an tadkhulul jannata وَلَمَّا يَأْتِكُمْ مِثْلُ الَّذِينَ خَلَوْا مِنْ قَبْلِكُمْ. So did you think Allah Ta'ala is addressing the mu'mineen at this point when they are suffering under this siege? Did you think that you will be let into paradise without being tested in the way that the previous communities have been tested? Did you imagine this? This is a point when they are hungry and thirsty. مَسَّتْهُمُ الْبَأْسَاءُ وَالضَّرَّاءُ وَالزُّلْزِلُوا. They were subjected to severe trials and tribulations, and they were convulsed, shaken. وَالزُّلْزِلُوا حَتَّى يَقُولَ الرَّسُولُ. Till such a point when their prophet said, because there have been prophets and messengers in previous communities, when their prophet said, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا مَعَهُ, and those who were with the prophet said, Mata Nasrullah. When will the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala come? This is a pattern that's repeated over history again and again. We can see it in our present age as well. Mata Nasrullah. Mata Nasrullah. And then it goes on to give good news. Ala inna Nasrallahi qareeb. Know that the help of Allah, Nasrullah, is close and will help you. Dear brothers and sisters, these ayat which I have recited here, they are speaking of severe challenges and confrontations that the Imam of any period, of a particular period, Hazrat Ibrahim at his time and the Holy Messenger in his time, the Imam and the system of Imamat are faced with severe challenges in both of these ayat. But they are dealing with strength. They are resisting. They are moving ahead from success to success, undefeatable. That's what is being described in these ayat. What is important here, and which is the fourth element that I would like to draw attention to, dear brothers and sisters, is that next to Hazrat Ibrahim, next to the word Ar-Rasul, next to the mention of our holy messenger, there is the mention of Alladhina Ma'ahu. There is the mention of those who are with him. those who believed in him, who followed him. There is a mention of these individuals here. Dear brothers and sisters, the point that we need to learn from this, and which we can learn from this, is that in every successful movement, apart from a lofty goal, a charismatic leader, and apart from a message that's addressed to a wide audience, we also have a special group that is closely associated with the imam or the leader of that movement. They are the inner circle. They are the inner circle. They are very close. They are very close, dear brothers and sisters. And it is through the help of this special group, we can see it here in the ayat, the allazina ma'ahu refers to these people. With the help of these special followers who are totally committed, these special followers who understand this mission much better than the others who have joined the mission. These special followers who are far more obedient, far more passionate, far more willing to sacrifice, far more patient than the others who have joined this movement. We see them playing an important role in this, dear brothers and sisters. Dear brothers and sisters, this special group can take several forms. And here I'm coming to the main theme of our discussion for tonight. This special group can take several forms. Perhaps it's a special organization, a formal organization, marked by a different uniform, for example, going and studying for a couple of years at a special institute, speaking a special language, living in a different part of the city with special skills and abilities, for example. It could be that. For example, in certain religious orders and movements, we have the concept of monks, for example. Now, if we imagine that religion to be a movement, then its special human ability or talent are the monks who serve it. What do? They live a life which is very different from ordinary people. They do not get married. They do not have families. They live apart in monasteries. And they have certain limited interaction with the people. This is one kind of doing of preparing a special group to play a central role in a movement. Of course, this has certain advantages, but it has a major disadvantage as well. It has a major disadvantage as well. And which is that the size of this special group will always be small. Will always be small. How many people can give up what is called a normal life, having kids, having family? How many people can do that? Obviously, only a small number of people are able to do this in any society. So that's a major disadvantage of having a special group of this kind. If a special group can be formed on lines and principles that allows it to grow and multiply enormously, not held back by any such constraint, any familial constraint, any societal constraint. If the doors to joining this special group are wide open, anybody can join it. If you're educated, you can join it. If you're not so educated, you can still join it and be part of this special group. If you're rich, you can join it. If you're poor, you can still join it. If you're old or young, male or female, this profession or that profession, this nationality or that nationality, you know just this language, that's fine. You know 4 other languages, that's great too. You can join as well. Everybody, if there were such a system, obviously that movement would find itself on a much stronger footing. Dear brothers and sisters, the 4th element of the system of imamat is in fact the Shia. The 4th element of the system of imamat that contribute to it being so successful and undefeatable is in fact people such as those who have gathered at this venue and this hall today. Let me just strengthen this argument by pointing to a hadith in this regard, which has been narrated from our which has been narrated by Imam Ali alayhi salatu wassalam, where he says, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I'll narrate only a part of the hadith which is relevant to us. He's describing Islam in this hadith as a gift from Allah, as a most valuable, one of the most valuable creations of Allah is the religion of Islam itself. And then he goes on to describe it. He says, Islam has certain elements. He says, it has a courtyard, something that allows us that we need to pass through so that we can enter it. That's what a courtyard does in any building. We pass through the courtyard, then we enter the main structure. So if the main structure is Islam, it has a courtyard. The courtyard is the Quran. Then he goes on to say, it is illuminated by light, a particular kind of light. Islam is illuminated by light. And that is wisdom, al-hikmah. Then he goes on to say, it is protected. Islam is protected by high walls that surround it. And what are those walls? He says, those are good deeds. Islam is protected by good deeds that surround it. And this is the point that I would like to draw on. Then he says, Islam has certain assistants and helpers, an-nasir. And here he says, wa amma ansaruhu. Wa amma ansaruhu. And now if you want to know who those helpers are, he says, fa ana. Wa ana. I. Wa ahlu bayti. And my ahlu bayt. We are the helpers. But he doesn't stop there. Wa shi'atuna. And our Shia, we, the three of us, because this is narrated originally from the Holy Prophet. Imam Ali himself is narrating it from the Holy Messenger. The Holy Messenger is saying, I, my Ahlul Bayt, and our Shia, we are the Ansar or the helper of what? Of Islam. Of Islam. So dear brothers and sisters, this is of the fourth element. The fourth element is that makes this movement so successful is in fact people such as you and me. And this has been designed in such a way, this fourth element, that anyone can participate in it. And when everyone participates in it, that's when it acquires strength and power. Not limited to a few people with a high entry-level barrier. You need to know this, you need to live a life such as this. Not necessary. Anybody can get in and strive to be better and better. Let me just give an example and make it clear. Many of us have been fortunate enough to go to Arba'in. Many of us have been. Isn't that the case? Arba'in has acquired this form, its present form, over the last 15 years. Prior to that, those who have visited prior to that know that there was no such thing visible at all. In just 15 years. In just 15 years, it has become the largest gathering of human beings in the world. Not just 15 years. It had achieved this in the first 6 to 7 years. And it has maintained that position even today, 15 years after it began to take this present form. The gathering is much larger than the Hajj and any other gathering that is held. It is the largest annual gathering of humanity in the entire world. How does this happen? We've been there, we've seen this. What role does the government play there? What is the role the government plays? The government provides security. The government provides electricity and a few other basic services such as this. Does the government house the millions of pilgrims who come there? Does the government feed the millions of pilgrims who come there? Not at all. Does the government transport the millions of pilgrims who come there to the border, to the airport? No, not at all. It is the Shia of Iraq. It is the Shia of Iraq who in 6 to 7 years managed to create the largest annual gathering of humanity that humanity has ever seen. Isn't this remarkable? If there was any government, no matter how much money it had, If someone would say, oh, the Iraqi government is not able to do it because, there are these economic problems in Iraq and there was war and all right. What about some other countries? What about the country that runs the Hajj? Does it have a shortage of funds? Not as far as we know. But they are not able to handle the numbers that come there in this way. Dear brothers and sisters, this is what happens when you are able to engage ordinary people into a movement. And it's just been 15 years. It's just the Iraqis up till now. Wait till time moves ahead and other parts of the Muslim Ummah get involved in a big way. Just in the first 15 years, we have this remarkable display of human organization and ability. And which is why one of the reasons of this, the durability of this and the resilience of this movement over the last 1400 years is people like you and me that have lived generation after generation as Shia serving this movement. Please recite a salawat bar Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. This is a movement that is able to attract anybody. One of the reasons it is able to attract anybody and play such an important role in it is that it gives anyone who is associated with it. And we can see this in our morning ceremonies and the commemoration of Karbala very well. Anyone who is associated with it feels a sense of honor and dignity. Anyone who is associated with it. And human nature seeks dignity, seeks honor, and runs away from any kind of dishonor and indignity. In these gatherings, everyone is treated with respect. Everyone is given the opportunity to play a role. It is unacceptable in these gatherings for somebody to act in a haughty and proud manner. It is unacceptable. It's a different matter that sometimes we end up making mistakes, but none of these mistakes are seen as acceptable. They are forgiven and we move on. Being associated with this movement gives us honor and dignity. And this too has its origins in Karbala. On the day of Ashura, we have this famous statement from our Imam, from Imam Hussain alayhi salatu wassalam, when he addresses the enemy's army and says these words which many of you have heard, some of you have memorized. When he says, speaking of Yazid, he says, Inna ad-da'i ibn ad-da'i. This undignified son of an undignified father. Speaking of Yazid. قَدْ رَكَزَ بَيْنَ اثْنَتَيْنِ. He has placed me in a position where I must choose between one of two options. بَيْنَ السِّلَّةِ وَالذِّلَّةِ. I must either choose the sword. There are all these swords which have been raised against me. I must either choose as-silla, the sword, or a-dhilla, indignity, debasement, humiliation. And then he goes on to say, وَهَيْهَاتْ مِنَّ الذِّلَّةِ. And debasement and humiliation and indignity are totally unacceptable to us. This is before he begins his battle in Karbala. The Hayhat Minna Dhilla slogan reverberates even today among Muslim communities. And we, the Shia, the fourth important element of the system of Imamat, the system of guidance, are proud that we are associated with it much more than any other Muslim community is. Much more. Inshallah, in the coming nights, we will be speaking about dignity and indignity, the true forms of dignity the false forms of dignity, and inshallah from that try and draw some lessons for our life. In the remaining few minutes that we have, let's travel and go back to Karbala. Let's travel to the year 61 Hijri, centuries ago. Dear brothers and sisters, back in those days, it was common for commanders to examine their armies before battle. The day before battle, a couple of days before battle, armies would stand in disciplined formation, dressed for battle, and the commander would ride around them, walk among them to observe. He would offer a word of advice here, maybe a suggestion there. If he would see any weakness, he would try and correct that. One of the purposes of this was, of course, to instill greater confidence and self-confidence and a feeling of being one team in the army. This was a fairly common practice in the olden days when armies used to be compact and wars used to be fought at single locations. So perhaps, dear brothers and sisters, we can imagine that if we were to travel back in time to the night of Ashura, the night preceding Ashura, perhaps we would see Imam Hussein alayhi salam doing something similar with his army. His army is a number of hungry and tired men, women, and children. They are sitting in their tents, around their tents. Somebody is praying, somebody is preparing and cleaning his weapons, they're talking among themselves. And if we are to imagine that Imam Hussein alayhi salam as a commander was to walk through these tents, in between these tents, as a commander who was examining his army prior to the day of battle, perhaps this is what we would see. Imam Hussein, when he passes by one of the tents, perhaps he would hear a lady's voice from inside the tent speaking to her son, saying, O Qasim, you are your father Imam Hassan's representative in tomorrow's battle. Make sure that you fight in a way that does justice to your lineage. Don't let anyone say that you let your uncle down. And if Imam Hussein overheard this, I'm sure he would say this in his heart. My dear sister-in-law, Farwa, worry not. Do not worry. Your son Qasim will set a shining example of obedience in battle tomorrow. Perhaps he would move ahead, he would hear another lady, and she is speaking to her child from another tent. Perhaps he would hear his own wife, Rabab, speaking to little Ali Asghar and saying, Oh Ali Asghar, oh how I wish you were a grown young man. You would be able to assist your father tomorrow and play an important role in his mission. And if Imam Hussein overheard this, I'm sure he would say to himself, Oh Rabab, you have no idea. Our little baby, our little Ali Asghar is going to set the battlefield on fire tomorrow. The biggest champions will shudder and quake with fear when he steps forward to battle. And inshallah we will touch upon his martyrdom and his way of doing battle a few nights from now. In one of the tents perhaps, we can imagine Our Lady Sayyida Zainab. Aqilatu Bani Hashim. Sayyida Zainab bint Ali ibn Abi Talib alayhi salatu wassalam. And she is speaking to her young sons, On and Muhammad. And perhaps she is telling them, Oh my dear children, make sure to consult with your uncle Abbas tonight. He is very learned in the arts of war. Make sure that you fight bravely tomorrow. Make sure that your actions more than your words. Prove to the enemy that the blood of Haidar al-Karrar courses through your veins. The day of Ashura begins, dear brothers and sisters. The two young boys set out to battle. They battle the enemy. The ladies are standing by the door of the tent to be able to observe these young men, these young children in battle. But their mother Sayyida Zainab is not with them. It is narrated that she is on the prayer mat praying fervently for her children's success. And we know, dear brothers and sisters, that success in the maktab of Ahl Bayt is different from the definition of success in the maktab of the opposing side. Praying fervently for their success. The ladies who are observing from the door of the tent, there is a commotion. Bibi Zainab's concentration is disturbed. Her concentration in prayer is disturbed. She notices that they are saying that the two boys, while giving chase to the enemy, have come near the banks of the river Furat. She is disturbed. She is greatly worried. Suddenly she calls out for Al-Abbas. She calls out for her brother Abbas. And she says, "Oh Abbas, come to me. I have a message for my children. Go and tell them, no matter how thirsty you may be, no matter how close you may be to the water, do not forget that your Imam is still thirsty. Do not forget that Sakina and the other children are still thirsty." After some time, the bodies of these two young martyrs are brought to the tents. The ladies and children, they step out of the tent, grieving, wailing, and receiving the bodies of these martyrs. They surround these bodies. They surround Imam Hussein. They are grieving, beating their chests, beating their heads, with tears rolling down their eyes. But their mother is not there. One of the ladies goes back inside the tent and says, "Zainab, come outside. Grieve for your boys. Grieve for your children. You are their mother. You must be there grieving for them." She replies, she says, "No, I will not come outside." "Why won't you come outside? You are their mother." She says, "It is because I am their mother that I will not go outside. I am afraid that as a mother, if I am to go beside their bodies and see their injured and mangled, martyred bodies, perhaps I may lose my patience. Perhaps I may say or do something which may lead to Imam Hussein feeling embarrassed. It may lead to him feeling ashamed. It may lead to him feeling hurt." Oh Sayyida Zainab, oh Lady Zainab, you are so worried that you should not hurt your brother. You are so concerned that your Imam should not feel any discomfort or pain. But what will you do in a couple of hours from now when your brother, when the Imam of his time is going to be showered by arrows? There are going to be spears thrown at him. Stones will be thrown at him, and he will fall from the horse onto the ground, and Shimr will step forward with his dagger unsheathed in his hand. Ala la'natullah ala qawmi adh-dhalimin. Sayalamu alladhina dhalamu ayya munqalibin yanqalibun.